We're talking about Lupin, man, and part two finally came out. We really enjoyed this French television series that was on Netflix, starring Omar Sy. And I think what we liked about the first five episodes was, the episodes felt kind of bottle episode-ish in a way. Like there was always like a scheme going on,
Mm.
a task with like an overarching, you know, Lupin or what's the name Diop versus
San Diop.
yeah versus
Yes. Big
the
fan of
bigger
Arsène
staff.
Lupin. Yes.
And it just felt like this part two didn't have the same je ne sais quoi. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but it
Yeah.
just didn't catch me the same. Something felt a little bit not as exciting. What? How did you feel about it?
I completely agree. And it's kind of interesting to think about how unusual Lupin Part 1 and 2 are. Because Part 1 comes out in early January, unexpected. Nothing really else to watch at the time apart from like Bridgerton, and it's a surprise hit. And it's the most successful French show on Netflix by leaps and bounds.
Mhm.
And Part 2 comes out 6 months later. It had already been filmed at the time Part 1 released, and yet Part 2 really is just Part 1, Part 2. It's like we just paused where Part 1 stops and we picked it right back up. It's like we divided a season. This is not really a season 2, it's the second half of the first season still.
Right.
And by splitting it like this, I mean, when I first started watching again, I was like trying to remember the narrative,
Yeah.
because the show really started focusing on plot. And I actually think that was a negative because part two really just is obsessed with plot, plot, plot in terms of Assan's trying to thwart and then, take down Pellegrini, the central villain. And it kind of gets away from the best parts of Lupin Part 1, which is those first few episodes where it feels like smaller stakes, but it's really just more grounded in Omar Sy's performance as Hassan in terms of his charm, the gentleman thief, the Lupin
Mhm.
character. Like
Right.
it's the heists, the trickery of it all. And then in part two, like towards the end, him and his boy have like a magic smartphone app that unlocks doors. Like it just felt like we kind of lost it, lost what the best parts of the show were.
Yeah.
Thankfully, Omar sees such a charismatic performer. He has a great presence whenever he's around, which is almost every scene. That it's still like fun, but I was let down by how like obsessed with the convoluted plot it became. The flashbacks we get in part two, completely inconsequential, and
Mhm.
they're just kind of like almost a lazy way to convey future twists.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think you summed it up well because I found myself just kind of wanting him to have one of those moments where he, I don't know, was in some random place on the television show dressed up as an old man and like, why is he, why is he doing this? Or you do get a few of those moments, right? Like in one of the episodes, he's dressed as like a cook, at one point, and he
Mhm.
uses that as a way to get into. I forgot what it was. I think it was the what's the opera thing? Because the opera thing or the concert thing, he dressed up as that like security person, and then he runs
Mhm.
away. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think I cared way more about the Lupin stuff and like the mystery, the like sleight of hand, and a lot less about the Asan, the op stuff. And when it's all about Asan and not as much about Lupin anymore, even though people could say they're one and the same, I just didn't find it as interesting. I also was just curious about his apartment. Like, he had this like back room with all these costumes and
It's
stuff.
huge.
Like, yeah, how does he afford that? Like, what is it? Didn't he just like get out of prison? Like,
Yeah, I was like, you must have, and then then you get, I think, like cool like set moments where he has like a safe house set up in a storage
Mhm.
locker. That's a cool idea. That also happens to be over a catacombs entrance, right? I like both parts for the how they play with Paris, where you're largely in Paris the whole time, and in part two you get a lot of memorable stuff. Once again, we're in the Musée d'Orsay a little bit, where you see the sign constantly. The
Mhm.
catacombs, of course. The Arc. He drives the Vespa around the Arc of Triumph. Like it's some Paris shit, you know. And that's always fun. But yeah, it definitely left me wanting, and like now thinking about it, like when it comes to like making my like list, like for the end of year, like Lupin Part One is definitely one of my favorite shows of the year.
Yeah.
But do I have to consider both of them as one piece? Because if so, it's getting a severe downgrade because it's just not as strong.
Yeah, no, I agree. Man, that'll be a question we'll have to answer similar to uh, the movie versus
Right.
TV debate last year. So
Oh God,
I
yeah.
don't know.
Small axe.
Yeah, I don't know. Definitely a disappointment, but I do think the first episode back, that like chase episode, was pretty fun. Although
Mhm.
I don't really know if I understand all the mechanics of that. The house was a little confusing at the end for me, like who was in what place, how to get to the
Yeah.
car and stuff. But yeah, I don't know, man. Disappointing, but I think Lupin Part One, like you said, something to treasure from this year. Nice surprise. So,
Right. So we know part
thoughts?
three's on the way. I just hope. What's his leave Pellegrini?
Yeah,
Let's just something new. Even if it's like a more, big narrative again with like a central villain or something, just do something a little different. And man, I mean, honestly, like the show probably peaks in the very beginning when he steals the necklace
yeah.
in the
That
Louvre,
episode's so
right?
good.
Like that was amazing. That like
Yeah.
completely hooks you in. And if we could find a way to get back to that DNA, uh, I think you'd win everyone back really fast.
Yeah, this doesn't feel like a show that needs that overarching villain though. It feels like
No,
it could just do 5 episodes, different stories, and like
right. And you
go to
have this
story.
central performance that's so magnetic. You have an
Yep.
amazing setting, and the whole like Lupin exists in the world of the show thing. You have so much going for it already. Yeah, I don't think you need to worry about like heavy plot. No
No.
question.